Chapter 3, Captain Caradoc. That's spelled C for Charlie, A-R-A, D for Donald, O-C. His name was in the Hindu scriptures, so I took it from there. The scene is on the Iblis spaceship. The lighted other aliens who can't be seen, cloaked in colors that turn bright purple, a warning signal to Caradoc, said, Mara cannot mentally withstand much more. Caradoc slips up from behind, held a white light beam to her temple. As she struggled against the intrusion, he held her front with one strong arm. She is trapped. His arm pressing against her breasts, his body pressed so close she feels a strange tingle in her womb, but still she froze. This white light is for conscious hypnosis. After subconscious instruction in Yahwist meditation, Mara is returned to the forest cliff unharmed. A frantic Esther Feingold is waiting. Esther was more a mother and doctor than anyone to her. Esther had ridden the old mare, Mara's Shetland pony, following behind. She had headed for the cliff as if she said she knew, but how could she? Mara appeared in the forest as if from out of nowhere, walking slowly towards Esther. Where have you been, Mara Nalim? She cried. Walking. No harm done. No harm? You've been gone all day. Oh, have I? Oh, dear, I'm sorry. I must have spent the daytime dreaming. It's a good thing your horse had better sense. When he came rapping at the kitchen window, I knew. She breaks off exasperated. Hurry up. Don't dawdle, girl. The whole village has come out to greet you. Shocked, Mara cried. Me? Why? The aging Sephardim Jewish woman spits. Supposedly for your birthday, but I expect it's favors they seek, not your good health. Caradoc listens amused and watches using his telepathic power. Finally, having assured himself all is well, he releases the monitor. The others' light disappear. They were cloaked in a light barrier so that radiation would not give Mara cancer. Iblisians had found a way to immunize themselves, but not yet found one for Earth humans. Their appearance was very similar to humans, except for their exceptional health and brain power. There was little difference. They never killed, of course, yet they could induce, through their great mental capacity, a human to act strangely when necessary. They were possessed of a few other major gifts as well. They lived at least for 3,000 Earth years. And they are born with full consciousness of DNA genetic memory. The galaxy people don't spend lives relearning as Earth humans do, repeating the same mistakes over and over again. After a solitary dinner, lost in pensive thoughts, Captain Caradoc changed his clothes in preparation for Tom's latest research. Caradoc sat at his large control desk wearing a suit of black velvet and gold trim. The effect against his flaming hair was awesome to Thomas, who said upon entering, You look worried, Caradoc. Tom frowns, then says brightly, And very handsome, I might add, and with a sensuous smile. Caradoc laughs. You third species have it good. Either sex will do. Not really. We prefer our own. Mara is charming despite being a primitive being. I liked her at once. Why not? We are all related genetically linked through the passing of time. I must say that velvet looks wonderful on you. Thank you, Tom, adding, I've grown quite fond of some of the earthling elaborate fabrics. Iblis fashion as you are wearing is tight, soft, and pliable, revealing and practical. Caradoc shifts position, opening a drawer. Like it? Tom swirls around, showing off his paired tunic that leaves little to one's imagination. Caradoc looks up, saying, Oh, you charming Tom. Albeit my dearest friend, was I wrong? Her disease is precarious at best. Her T and B immune system is strong so far, yet She is dangerously weak against chemicals. She's also too sensitive emotionally to the depravity surrounding her, as it is on this demonic planet, which accounts for her suicidal tendencies. I wonder, did I make the right decision today? You did, Caradoc. I believe in you. Tom kissed his hand and then adds in support. Her genetic line is dying out. It's the only way to activate her telepathic powers. Caradoc's eyes glistened dark emerald. Standing up, he strode to the gigantic window, gazed below to earth, then said, Yes, we need her hypnogenetic memory so she can analyze her own disease. We don't have this disease, so how can we analyze it correctly? I agree. Yes, Caradoc, it was worth a try. Tom rushes to the side of the king captain he worships, touching his arm, then holds his hand, kissing it again, saying, You're right. We can record the results, picking up her analysis by telepathy. It will work. It's a grand experiment, and I find it all so exciting. Thank you for wanting me to be here. Tom is referring to the close association they will have together. This project will continue until the day she dies. And I too, Caradoc says quietly, but thinks to himself. But not for quite the same reasons. Caradoc had watched over her since birth. He had at this encounter grown to admire her spunk. The powerful limerick chemistry that electrified between them had caught him by surprise. Earth people call it love, but it is just the body's electrical system sending currents into the brain, similar to the drug morphine and highly addictive. Tom, put on the future YID computer. Let's see how this meeting shall affect her. Too soon, it must transmit through Ormaz to Iblis, then back. Too soon, shaking his head, Tom said. During the weeks that follow, they work diligently together. Caradoc's private lab is filled with the odors of sweet and sour juju fruit, found in the Himalayan mountain during spring thaw. An exotic rare fruit, it had properties that affect the cerebral brain section. To humans, the cerebral is the captain of a ship. It either sends out correct signals to heal or malfunctions, sending out those signals that kill. For centuries, celestials had believed that they could control human genetic defects through the DNA factor in their blood. That effort proved a catastrophe. Tampering with natural design created even worse genetic mutations and spawned uncontrollable immune deficiencies. The victims and their offsprings became a virtual breeding ground for mutant viruses. Their crude interference with natural laws of God, creator of the universe, were abandoned thousands of years before. Their attempts at inducing similar mental powers of celestials was also a disaster. Caradoc stopped reading, smiling, going over his father's records on human histology. Ormazian scientist 651 BC took Ezekiel for a ride in space, whose translations were accurate considering his primitive understanding. Buddha was entirely misguided by it, however. Both Ezekiel and Buddha enjoyed the spaceship ride, but otherwise, the power of Tai Chi mental ability, although beneficial, did not adapt what we had hoped. Brilliant as both human men became, neither did it cure their genetic cerebral malfunction. Perhaps the juju, amphetamine of unusual combination, he says, and then his voice trails off. He's interrupted by Tom. Come look. Under a microscope, he checks the inner sanctum of the underground world of mysterious power, bacteria and viruses. Tom is very emotional, explaining. It was clear on Captain Jupiter's final report. It was clear. Even to those primitive X-rays, an inferior magnetic resonance imaging scans shows damaged brain tissue. The Huron tribe and Welsh coal miners both exhibit cancer. Cancer is not genetic, but triggered by overexposure to toxins and chemicals that are poisonous. Here, look. Another of the slides reveals that a virus to cows and many animals gave them cancer. He adds, by whose meat they in turn, when eaten by carnivorous humans, get a T and B cell weakening. Tom is visibly excited, while Caradoc retains his composure and says, humans who ate from its flesh definitely got cancer then? Yes, it's true, Tom said, but cooking does not entirely kill it. It passes down the food chain. Look, it is here in this codfish sample. He slips in a fish sample under the microscope. And the chemicals? It is the biochemical accumulative effect, Caradoc. Not one thing, but a multiple combination. Turn out the lights, Tom, when you retire. Oh, I'm sorry, you're exhausted. You've hardly slept. We'll continue at noon. Sleep all you can. Yes, we've much to do. Thank you, Tom. Caradoc thinks to himself, whatever would I do without him? We may not love the same sex, but he is the best friend and most brilliant scientist of all time. He thought of the lesbian queen Brunhilde and all she had accomplished until the first pope in 655 AD destroyed it. That pope was a true woman hater, a misogynist. He raped boys, and the brutal despot had her incarcerated into a convent in Germany. She succumbed to his will and dared not retaliate, misguided that it was against God. Even the most gifted can be duped. In the end, her great healing programs died with her in that convent prison. From then on, the Bible was devoid of disease control. There was the Lady Joan de Clisson, who had fled her home in 1374, when the French king, lusting for her estates, had executed her docile husband. Her grief quickly turned into rage, but not the normal kind. It was a rage that was channeled in a forthright, positive manner. She became the first woman pirate. She had controlled the English Channel waters in 1376. To this day, her descendants are democratic, but fiercely independent of dictatorial parliaments. Her success was to eventually have settled in one of the remote Channel Islands. She and her people fought against feudal slavery, and the island was run in an unusual system that was warm, friendly, sharing, and giving. But justice against thieves, rapists, and murderers was swift. It was this very same island and Clisson descendants who had just last year rescued the fleeing, brilliant scientist genius King Charles II. By the age of 9, King Charles could outthink the lot of them. By the age of 24, he would have all but given up in despair. Caradoc's thoughts trigger images that kept intruding. It was easier to sit back in the dark, staring out into space with his thoughts. Then he lay down, meditated, and fell asleep until noon the following day. Tom woke him with fresh exotic fruit from the islands off the coast of South America. He had changed into the standard work clothes of metallic fabric. It could not burn. Waterproof, yet it allowed the sweat to be soaked from the inside out. This fabric was one of Tom's many achievements. There were so many. Caradoc looked up at the young boy laying the bed tray across his chest. He doted on Caradoc's every whim. His worship was that great. Yet here was a boy who grew up in another world with heroes other than his. However, they had mutual admiration for each other's talents. Tom was a computer whiz, and Caradoc could not manage without him. Tom, the capsule that you found from Atlantis, is it analyzed yet? Yes, finished it this morning. Good man, you are amazing. Send its contents through AVA at 1,000 words per minute. Wait for a few months. We may solve human kenosis yet. Tom's boyish face grins. His light blue eyes sparkle as he brushes a small, delicate hand through his curly blonde locks. Caradoc ponders. Part girl, part man. Tom is a fetching creature. Homosexuals have one female chromosome more than heterosexuals. Lesbians are opposites. They have one more male chromosome. They are the third species of God. They fall in love and marry just like everyone else. They adopt and raise children who are at birth identified like themselves. Caradoc's mind is wandering in circles thinking, what is wrong with me? He stood up, getting a grip on himself. Changing into his lime green silk robe, he turned around to Tom, saying, is the information in the capsule you found in Alabama really that good? Yes, it is, Tom shrieks. Tom cannot contain his excitement while explaining. Caradoc stands, attentively listening. Its contents have visually confirmed that human cheminosis is both inherited and acquired by parents who are chemically poisoned. It is not in the blood, although it's neither really a bacteria or a virus. It is triggered entirely by poisoning first. This renders them immune deficient and increases sociopathic psychosis, but it is physical and not mental, similar to schizophrenia. Both are genetic factors and also acquired in diet or toxic environment. Then each generation has increased cheminosis when born with a genetic cerebral malfunction, which they all do. But this we knew. Still, they further progress it by toxic diet, environment, or contagious by sexual contact, and sometimes even transmitted through saliva. Then all the invading bacteria and chemicals remain trapped in the upper intestines. Caradoc explains, now very excited. No wonder our DNA interference failed, he slapped Tom playfully. Fillet of fish, of course. It is so simple. Why didn't we figure that out centuries ago? But, my beloved captain, even to a genius, the most complex problem is eluded by the simplicity of the solution. And they burst out laughing, as did the crew behind them. After being told, Jocular on Ormazad solemnly declares, sure, but will the humans listen? Back to the drawing board, Caradoc, Tom quips. Tom, stop this research and concentrate on their cerebral brains. Tom heartily agrees. Yes, the brain holds the key. Back on Earth, at the castle, Mara looked alluring in her doublet, wide sleeves, narrow sash, and wide-brimmed hat with its peacock feathers, all the more seductive by her mass of long black hair, natural ringlets tumbling down in the wind. Wistful hazel eyes stare out from behind the elaborate Spanish fan that she always carried with her, and considered a sort of a trademark. Spanish fans are noticeable, very beautiful, drawing attention to her femininity. Despite the mannish clothes that she often wears, it is held by delicate hands that are freezing cold, but she does not seem to mind. Or is it that she does not care? Mara stands still, looking at the ocean, whimsical, remembering that little more than a month has passed when she had tried to kill herself on just such a cliff as this. It was on Anglesey Island in Wales, but some damn fisherman has seen her slipping, singing, crashing into the freezing waves. The darn fool had rescued her. Her life was full of such mysterious rescues. Absent-minded, she pulls out a strange handkerchief from between her breasts. It is made of an unusual light fabric she has never seen before. It contains zephyrin, a chemical non-toxic to humans that absorbs and kills virus and bacteria. How did she know that? Her grandiose name was Princess Mara Nalim-Traherne, distant cousin to her father, said once to King Caradoc de la Touraine of France. During this period, Flanders and several French provinces are under the control of the savage Spaniards, whose siege decimated the peasants as if cattle. Yet valleys and its kindly people were entirely peaceful, surrounded as they were by horrific violence and civil war. Around 1637, King Caradoc disappeared, but his control had lingered on. Mira had not used her royal name very long. In Ireland, Esther said it was best to drop royal pretensions. She had been born again last year. Somehow that reminds one of reincarnation. Thinking again, not really, it was quite different. She had so little conscious memory, then slowly it began surfacing, as if in dreams, except while awake. The Irish did not underestimate her powers, were indeed paranormal. It was to her not particularly unusual, but in England, Scotland, France, and Spain, people like her were set on fire. Italy and the Pope's army mutilated regularly such creative geniuses as hers. Genetic memory was simple to use once you got the hang of it, but then few remembered genetic memory. Buddha and Nostradamus had it, but then Buddha was a food addict, eating himself to death, while Nostradamus, addicted to beer, died from gout. She was not sure how she knew that. An odd picture formed in her mind, and she simply could read it and see it from inside her brain, like looking at a movie. It was as if documents were in her head. No, more than that. She could feel the past, see the future in fragmented pictures so real she could smell the blood and watch the flowing pus on the female crotch. So real the stench was enough to gag her. Yet she felt compelled to research disease, even though its condition near made her vomit. Hypnogenetic imagery analysis was the reason she could see what mere mortals could not. She presumed that no one understood it on earth and probably never would. Esther had cautioned her against telling anyone. She remembers again escaping from the explosion of her Spanish paradise. Memories of herself were fleeting fragments. She had so many blanks and spaces in her mind. She remembered herself the way you would someone you read about, but had never yet met. Then, next, a horrible vision flashed. She saw Sahib, her lovely Moor prince, her beloved childhood companion, smashed to his icy death on the shores of an ocean grave. Had he, or was it all a bad dream? Or is it the future? Forced at 14 to flee Spain with the Sephardim Jewish gypsies, she spent 3 horrific years wandering throughout Europe, always very ill, since sickness to her was no stranger since the age of 5. Eventually she had arrived with Esther Feinhold in London, England safely. Sephardim gypsies, some of great wealthy connection that Mara never understood, had brought Mara to England, shrouded in a veil of mystery. Through this worldwide underground connection, Esther had prevailed on the good graces of Sir Richard Boyle. As a billionaire, Richard stood to lose it all to Cromwell, who had murdered Charles I. Religious zealots used God, the great prophets, even Jesus, as their excuse to pillage, rape, and slaughter. Mara spent her time in seclusion, reading, and despite her frail condition, displayed many incredible talents, musical and scientific. But she could be a formidable enemy. She remembers when just 9 years old, she had sensed her wine in the jewel flagon was drugged. In these times, you had to often drink wine because the water was so contaminated, and the wine killed the germs and bacteria. When the thugs lunged, she had leapt at them with a sudden fierceness that could only be called shrewd. The ruse alerted her guards. 3 men backed off, witnessing her plunge a utensil into the gut of her would-be assailant. The violent challenge had diverted the others, who fled. Her guards found her standing there screaming, crying, and covered in blood. Mara had escaped certain death at 17 by the womanly supplication of a woman's tears. The English knave were entirely moved by her glistening tears running down her sweet cheeks. henceforth subdued under her spell, he was trapped into eternal devotion. Although she managed to possess by admiration many a bloodthirsty despot, somehow the game always led her to brutality, followed by her own victim behavior, for which she was filled with guilt and remorse. She became jaded by the depravity she witnessed everywhere. By the time she was 20, a slender and beautiful maiden, the tarnish of life showed in the lack of luster in her eyes. She lost much of her physical vitality and did not seem to care much about anything. Yet still she had been secure for a year at Boyle's northern Lancashire castle, when more violence erupts. There was so much in this land that she despised. Her own life became meaningless and futile. It was then she sunk into a deep suicidal despair. Her attacks worsened, and Esther feverishly mixed herbal teas and ancient Hebrew remedies to keep her alive. Suicidal, it was against Mara's will. Then, at the Boyle Castle came under siege by Cromwell, Richard sent her a paper of entitlement to Glenheim, his castle in the south of Ireland. He feared he'd lose it anyway. Because of the Spanish invasions into French territories, his brilliant son Robert had been sent to Italy with his 2 tutors for safety. Mara and Robert had never met. He spent most of his time at Oxford until 13, and then had been sent abroad, as Sir Richard's resident castle at Cork was under siege by Irish Catholic rebellion. Despite civil war and religious murder all about, Robert's reputation as a brilliant lad was well known at Oxford. Mara and Esther's journey to Ireland was treacherous, and the hardships and agony to bear. During the spring of 1652, while fleeing from Cromwell's despots, she had been given shelter at Anglesey Island. It was pleasant enough with its castles, lie-washed medieval dwellings, windmills, quiet coves, and magnificent cliffs that faced the Irish Sea. After she had attempted suicide and the storm had settled, the fishermen took them across to Northern Ireland. Landing in Dublin, they had hired a carriage. They had with them a Jewish couple and one guardian. It was the same devoted man who had tried to kidnap her when she was 17. Halfway to Glenholm, he was murdered, shot as they were attacked by Cromwell's renegade soldiers, who were all murderers, rapists, and thieves. The grief-stricken Myra became deranged with rage. She grabbed his sword and knife from his bleeding carcass. Like 2 fighting claws, she stabbed at their horses. The poor creatures reared in agony as their riders plunged to the ground, taken by surprise. She may have looked too frail to put up a fight, but under nerves of steel, her delicate muscles braced for her fight. Her senses quickened in subconscious split-seconds vibrations, deciding her next move. The sun glittered through her thorny branches, flashing her eyes. They turned black, the polish of ebony, glaring black eyes that were twisted with rage. Her rage of grief had won over fear. She wielded the sword and knife in each hand, slicing through the air, screaming obscenities. They froze on the ground a moment. Then one moved toward her and she plunged the sword, then snapped her body round for the moving beasts coming at her as the other lay bleeding to death. Fortunately, the dying man was the man with the gun, and he had lost the power in the ruckus. She had sliced his jugular vein in his neck, and the blood splurted out like a fountain. Covered in blood, Mara spun her head. He was dead. Glaring, she dug her feet into the ground. Then, spreading her legs in a defiant stance, she stood waiting and screaming, the bloody sword whistling in a circle. It was clear to Esther's horror Mara had become temporarily insane. The grisly sight held the roads the rogues back for another moment. Then they slowly merged with extreme caution and began moving slowly towards her. Suddenly surrounded by a thick green fog, there appeared a mysterious warrior on horseback. He was cloaked in a black hooded cape, a mask with bulging, piercing eyes covering his face and hair so that you could not identify him. He fought a furious battle against over a dozen thugs and won, killing them all. Dead, bleeding bodies littered the fields, a gory but not uncommon sight. Still never done by just one man very often. Further, once he rescued her and her small escort, Esther kept crying, still shaken from the traumatic event. He's a demon wearing a mask, and your hair's all covered in blood. Damn all the British. They're worse than Spaniards. It was soon explained in the next village that he was the leader of the Irish freedom fighters. But how he knew to be there miles out of his turf, since only Northern Ireland was his territory? All this mystery only made the daring rescue all the more curious. Before Mara could even thank the brave gentleman, he had galloped off, disappearing, as if he flew into the horizon. They had arrived at Blenheim Castle safe, but it could be said the young woman was in a strange trauma. The morning of her birthday, she rode out on a gelding and disappeared all day, and taking over the castle had not been without incident. Geraldine O'Donnell, the housekeeper, was at first obviously annoyed. Checking the letter reluctantly accepts by saying, "They are legally valid from Sir Richard Boyle. I'll send my son Ian to fetch your bags." All the tenants appeared rude at first, but it was her meeting at the Grand Volume that won them over. "I am not British. I owe no allegiance to any king, queen, or country. I believe in no human god, but one God of the universe. You are not my slaves, and I am not your keepers. Together we shall create wealth that I fully intend to share with one and all. I will send Sir Richard only 30% of his fair share, and not the usual 90. Are you with me or against me?" Her accent somewhat strange, a mixture of French, Yiddish, and Spanish. Her English, however, impeccable, left them staring as if they had seen a ghost. Mara stood in a velvet blue gown, the bodices laced to her breastplate. The gown is trimmed with lime green lace. The delicate semi-see-through lace billows out in ruffles in an off-the-shoulder circular fashion. Naked shoulders and neck reveal the palest of fair luminous skin. From the waist, the dress flowed softly down her curving hips, flowing to the floor in a soft wide circle. An unusual style for any country. She insisted on her own designs that the Jewish couple sewed for her tirelessly. It was a labor of love. The young woman could not grasp why her audience remained speechless. She kicked at her skirt, hands firm against her hips. She stood with her legs spread, back straight. Then the cleavage of her breast puffed as she demanded, "Are you all deaf? Are you with me or against me?" Their spokesperson finally said in a voice quivering with fear, "Could this be treason?" "Of course not. Don't take me for a fool. Sir Richard gave me full legal powers to do as I please, and it pleases me to run this estate in a joint effort and joint gain. I don't approve of greed, or I might add, white slavery of any person's color or creed." It was then they wept for joy, applauding her, and several rushed over to kiss her hand. What a fuss, she thought, then smiled while instructing. "Well, back to work. I want the animal dung gathered and spread on the soil immediately." "Animal dung, madam?" they cried. "But why?" "To fertilize, of course. Lord thundering, man, I can see you'll have much to learn. And then I want my gardens and fields seeded for early spring. Winter's coming, but if you plant now, the seed will freeze and we'll get 2 crops next year." "Why, it's never been done," they cried. "So what? We'll do it, by gum, and double the profit." She took to wearing the gentleman's trousers of the day, finding women's skirts not practical for working. The tight stockings to the knee and short balloon pants of leather on her long, slender legs was a fetching sight. The women at first were scandalized, then all took to wearing them, once they saw the male appreciation. She loved the work in the fields, right alongside the men and women. Children were assigned to Esther's charge. Learning to read and write, they covered subjects of French, English, Spanish, science, mathematics, farming, and political finance. However, no religious teachings were allowed, since Mara considered any religion that worshipped men or women and anything born on the planet as a god as pagan. The subject of sex was unspeakable to Mara. The children's choice was work like a dumb ox or learn to study, completing all homework that is assigned to you, or go to the fields you go. Not one child disagreed. She had a way of demanding cooperation by the sheer logic of her demands. All her tenants soon worshipped this mysterious, brilliant woman. Mature of mind and presence beyond her years in this day and age, she still looked inexplicably youthful in appearance, and she behaved with the affection of a child. She hugged the children arriving for tutoring before heading to the fields on her gelding. She instantly loved this rugged land and its hardy people. It could be said that Mara, for now, was truly happy. This part of Ireland was wild and wet. Rocky headland met the fierce storms from the Atlantic Ocean. Mountainous peninsulas part wild waves splashing into drowning valleys between them. But there were often a Gulf Stream wind bringing with it warm seasonal air, which encouraged her to believe that vegetation in sheltered places would grow into lush gardens. Cherry arbutus grew profusely along the shores and on islands in the upper lake region. It was, however, poorest farming, needing cultivation, and the least settled part of Ireland. Sir Richard had found it a financial drain and unable to sell it. His kindly action giving her managing rights to it were not entirely humanitarian. He was a ruthless businessman. Several factors would retard development on this area, as the world was unaware of its hidden potential. This served to suit her reclusive needs. To Mara, it held the hope of her shattered dreams. She took to roaming its rugged terrain. One day the steam from the nostrils of a wild, proud Palomino stood in her path through the forest leading to her favorite cliff. His mottling, patched color of dirty white and brown captured her ardor. She slipped down from her gelding and stood watching him. His back legs kicked and then his front reared up in an aggressive stance. His mouth whistled and large teeth sent out his challenge. She stood staring a while, then spoke in a soft melodic tone, humming, Maranatha, Maranatha, Maranatha. He stood still, his ears twitched, listening. She held out her right hand, and soon, slowly, she walked towards him, then held a palm to the steam rising from his nostrils. He sniffed in the frosty air, then bent his neck and rubbed and patted him. Then the magnificent beast trotted alongside her on the gelding, keeping her company from that day on. She soon rode him bareback, but he remained wild, and she respected this. So she called him Freedom in honor of his valiant spirit. Whenever he galloped off for the day, round sup, she would holler, All free! And he would soon appear, eating from her hands. And when she arrived at the field, she greeted everyone as long-lost brothers and sisters with a hug. They had soon responded to their unusual mistress with equal kindness and grew to deeply love her. Finally, good news arrived. A truce with Cromwell is declared. Richard offered to send her to London with his daughters, but Mara flatly refused to return to England. She had despised London and its squalor. Consequently, Sir Boyle continued her legal right to manage the estate. Frankly, he was pleased by her decision. He was amazed at courier reports were describing her strange democracy that had endeared her forever into the hearts of the Irish for miles around. He is furthermore extremely impressed that although his percentage is much decreased, the profits themselves have more than doubled by the end of the first year. Peaceful coexistence, teaching, reading, and writing in both French and English became normal at Glenheim Castle. She recently abandoned Spanish for ancient history, insisting, "If you don't know your history, you don't know yourself." She herself continued to study increasingly hard, to the chagrin of Esther and Geraldine. The two women fretted over her like mother hens. Although she is never able to master their strange Irish tongue, she understood it now well enough to know that they worried. Still, many people gossiped of her mysterious disappearing, often to be stood at the cliffside. Because of their devotion, they said nothing of it beyond that. She could not explain if they had asked. Esther kept a wary eye, feeling a foreboding sense of doom. Caradoc, from his ship, looks down and watches her amused as she entered the sphere, wearing a ballroom gown of shimmering silver and hand-woven gold-embossed country flowers. He had beamed her back to the ship once again. "Why do I have full memory here and so little at Glenheim?" she asked. "For your own protection," he said, "a precaution." She queries him on the effectiveness of scattered radiations from single gamma emitting doses. Humans, if they ever get this knowledge, will not use it for benefit but to destroy. Their ballistic insanity will manage to disperse it into our atmosphere. And as she spoke often in breathless streams, he looked at her gown's flower design. "Weaved, are they not, Mara?" "Yes, and lovely ones too." You could see her pride. "Why so handsomely dressed today?" "So the others will see their pupil is prospering," she said, adding, "Why can't we spend all more time, a week perhaps?" "Not possible, your health will not take it." "Oh, phooey, I've not been better. I'm always stronger in winter. The work in the fields has done blossomed my energy." "And that is not all, I might add," Caradoc said, his emerald eyes flashing a burning orange, picking up the hue from the lighted others. The compliment was sincere, and she was delighted by it. "Ready?" he asked, as he bowed over her head. His eyes told her he was enamored with her as she was with him. She curtsies, and her lips part. Her tongue slid across her lips. The air in the sphere felt delicately warm. As the atmosphere eclipsed with sexuality, "Yes, my king, on tender hooks." There is no mistaking the double meaning of her intention or his growing amusement. End of chapter 3. It's longer than I expected. I'm going to end it here. It's 43 minutes, and I'll do chapter 4 as a separate chapter.